Hello, everybody.
I like how you backed off the mic so that you didn't overmodulate. Well
It's
done.
professionalism.
Yeah,
you know?
that was really good.
I've learned a lot, and this is the end of season 3 of Dirt Nap City. Time is flying. Now we have as many episodes as some of your favorite TV shows. I think, what we got, about 80 episodes, 75 episodes? Something
Yeah,
like that?
no, I think we're in the 80s at this point.
Yeah. I mean, we're doing well. We're not quite in 60 minutes territory yet, but, I think it's more fun than 60 minutes.
And you know what? We also have some big news. I don't know if you saw this, but we have a new Buzzsprout supporter. Did you see that?
No.
Scott Henderson from Austin, Texas is our Buzzsprout supporter and jumped on and is...
Do you mean Patreon?
No, you can actually support through Buzzsprout as well.
Oh, way to go, Scott.
I think he might be the first one to do that for us. And what it does, we pay for Buzzsprout every month, and until you make enough, it just helps offset the cost of the Buzzsprout subscription. So Scott is actually, I would call him at this point like associate producer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thanks, Scott. Does that mean we have to start submitting our scripts to Scott?
Well, funny thing, he's a client of mine on my regular job, so I have to do that anyway. So yeah, he's probably expecting something along those lines.
All right. Well, I'll have this. This is totally scripted show.
Yes.
Some people think we riff on this.
Oh no, I'm reading a line right now.
Yeah, I mean, I've memorized.
Ha.
Right, I memorized all of this stuff.
Kelly winks at Alex. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, actually, these are characters.
Right. This is like Stephen Colbert.
People often ask me how similar I am to my character on this show. Not much.
Absolutely not at all.
Not really.
No, nobody would like Alex in real life, but.
Oh, I was thinking it the other way around. I was thinking I was playing a son of a bitch.
You're much nicer on the show than you are in person, Alex. Come on. We know this is true. Well, big shout out to our Patreon and Buzzsprout supporters, and to our viewers and listeners on YouTube. We've exceeded 100 subscribers at this point on YouTube.
Thanks, everybody.
And then the next thing we should probably say is Merry Christmas. We're getting close.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah. Merry Christmas, everyone, and God bless ye all.
People didn't always say Merry Christmas.
I heard that was popularized, right?
That's about what we're talking about today. This is one of those episodes where you and I are not surprising each other. Kind of ironic that we choose the Christmas episode to not do
surprise each other. Right. Look what I got you. I got you Charles Dickens.
So we're going to be talking about Charles Dickens today. I don't know what your relationship with Charles Dickens is, but to me, we have a tradition in our house where we go to see A Christmas Carol every year. We've probably gone every year since 2000, maybe 2000. So
okay.
Almost 24 years. We've probably, this is we're going to be going in a couple of days to go see Christmas Carol at the Alley Theater in Houston.
Very cool.
I'm a big, I fell in love with that play. I think when I saw it in 2000, that might have been the first time I'd seen it on stage, though. I had seen probably the Muppet Christmas Carol and all those, but I really enjoyed it. And then I think after the first or second year, I downloaded the text to the novella of Christmas Carol.
Okay.
He's just such a good writer. I just love the way he writes. I love the character names. I love all that stuff. I sadly have not read a lot of other Dickens stuff. But I plan to, especially after, I'm sure I'll run right to the local library after we talk about him today, because I think he's a great writer and I think its stuff is kind of timeless. But what's your relationship with Charles Dickens?
Christmas Carol is probably the thing I know the most. I have seen the play not every year, but I saw it a number of times, college performances, and went to see it with my grandmother. I think I saw maybe a high school version of it. It's just a really great story. and you can see it again and again. And what's cool about the way they do it in the play is they will change up. It's unique, right? When you see a stage play of it, you're going to see something that is a little bit different depending on who's putting it on, depending on who the characters and the actors are and the sets. I definitely love the Victorian kind of aspect of it. The really frilly that age costumes from England, but it just kind of takes you away. And for some reason, England to me is very Christmas.
Have you been there for Christmas?
No, never been to England for Christmas. Have you?
No, I'd love to though. I would.
Seems like it'd be a really cool place to be for Christmas.
Yeah, I think so too. I agree with you about the adaptations too. That at the Alley Theater, which is one of the best regional theater companies in the country, the version that they used to put on was called Christmas Carol: A Ghost Story of Christmas. Okay. It was almost spooky. It was almost kind of scary. They had a lot of supernatural kind of things going on, and I really enjoyed that. But it wasn't for little kids at all.
Oh, it would actually scare you.
There's a lot of like skulls and scary stuff in it. And they've backed away, I think, ever since like maybe 2019 or 2020. They have a different adaptation that I don't care for as much. But just like you said, you can do it so many ways. And then the older you get, you kind of see different things from it. I think when I was younger.
You relate to different characters.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I think when adaptations happen, I think like I was reading that during the Great Depression, you would have seen a different version of Christmas Carol than you would have in the 1980s, when corporate greed was kind of the thing. In America, at least. I think in the UK they kind of make it more straight, but in the US, I think they kind of change the adaptations depending on what's going on in the world, which is kind of what's fun about theater, anyways.
Yeah, 100%. And it is interesting because Christmas Carol being a very famous book of his, but he did David Copperfield, he did Oliver Twist, he did. I mean. There's a lot of things that people have heard of that maybe they don't realize are attributed to Charles Dickens. Great Expectations, Nicholas Nickleby, right? Something that most people probably maybe have heard that name but don't know anything about it. Tale of Two Cities was Dickens. I mean, he really had a string of hits as far as his writing went. But then he did these serialized things, and that's really how he got started with his writing was the Pickwick Papers. Have you heard of that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the idea that he would have what we know now as cliffhangers, that at the end of each episode you would put somebody in peril, and then you'd have to wait until the next one would come out. I think they came out every month, right?
Yeah, it was a monthly thing.
And, back then a lot of people didn't read. And so people, like illiterate people, would even pay a half a penny to have these things read to them, and then they would, half a penny, in 1840s.
I was going to say, how do you even break a penny in half?
Well, a hay penny.
Is that what it's called?
That? Back then, yeah. If you don't have a hay penny, then God bless you. Yeah,
no.
Half penny. In today's dollars, that's like 37 cents.
Dang, for someone to read to you.
Yeah, but imagine, I think you would pay and somebody would like stand up on an apple box maybe.
Okay.
And they would read to the group, but you'd have to pay like
each person would pay 37 cents or a hay penny.
Sure.
And this person would walk away with, $3.70 worth of hay pennies.
Yeah, sure. Just by reading the monthly story. I don't think they were terribly long. I think, you could read one of these in 20 minutes.
Right. But this was before television. This was before radio. This was before any of that stuff happened. And I don't even know that serialized stuff was very popular before that. I think he
kind of invented it.
Yeah. He and the publishers that he was working with. But let's back up a little bit to his early life. So he was the son of Elizabeth and John Dickens, and something I learned that I actually didn't know before was that John Dickens, his father, while they weren't poor, they were often in a lot of debt. His father was pretty a man who worked for the Naval Pay Office, but he lived beyond his means, and he would borrow money from family. He would borrow money from business associates, and he did not always pay it back. He liked finer things. He couldn't really afford them, and so he ended up going to debtor's prison when Dickens was 11 years old. And I think a lot of people may or may not know. I didn't really know that he was a big social reformer, right? A social critic, a reformist.
Dickens,
and I think a lot of that came from seeing his father being incarcerated in debtor's prison when he was 11, 12 years old.
Yeah. Let me just give you a little picture of what the Victorian era was like. I mean, we think of Dickens, you could picture like poor people running around in the streets of England, right?
Yeah.
Dirty children, right? That you could kind of, when I say Dickensian, you can kind of think of that. Also, like in a lot of the Roald Dahl stories, you see that kind of the same thing.
Yep.
Or even like the Willy Wonka movie that we watched last year, kind of that same vibe, right? That Victorian England where some
everybody's
people are really
on a top
rich.
hat and a velvet coat, or they're in rags,
exactly,
and and no shoes.
Speaking Cockney, right?
Right.
At least in the U.S. version, that's what they speak. But so we're talking about the time Victorian England was like from 1837 to 1901 under Queen Victoria. So that was right when he lived, and so in this era was like kids didn't really go to school. I think in 1820, only 20% of children had any schooling. Now, part of Victorian England was that it was increasing, but it was very common for kids not to go to school. You know what they did instead? They worked.
Yeah.
You would have 8-year-old kids go and be chimney sweeps because they could fit in small crevices, and they'd have them do sometimes really dangerous work. There was a lot of disease. There was industrialization was just starting.
Pollution.
There was a lot of child labor, a lot of pollution. And there was absolutely no appetite for poor people back then in England. They just didn't. They thought they were kind of the scourge of society,
and they blamed them for being poor.
Absolutely. So they passed a law. Have you ever heard of the Poor Law Amendment Act? Come across that?
No, I have heard of the. It was something like the debtor's deed or something like that. But what's the Poor Law Amendment?
Well, it was basically so people would take relief, and relief is like what we would call welfare today.
Okay.
And they would always the politicians of the day would always say that people would rather be on relief than work, So the law made it where you could only get relief or welfare if you went to a workhouse. Sometimes workhouses were called poorhouses.
Okay.
And a workhouse is somewhere where you would go and you would live and you would break stones, or you would crush bones to make fertilizer, or you would spend your time taking like a rope and picking it out with a spike. Just really horrible labor.
Breaking stones and crushing bones.
Right. The idea is that it would be so distasteful that you would rather just not ask for the relief at all. And that's where, when you hear a lot of his works have talk about workhouses and debtors' prisons, like you said, and the evil people, the villains of these things would, in Christmas Carol, he says, are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? In terms of when people would come by and ask for charity, they would say, what happened to the workhouses and all that. Debtors' prison that you mentioned was even worse, and it was a scam. So a debtors' prison is where you would go and you would pay a fee to be in the debtors' prison. So they would take a fee from you. You would be let out during the day and go to work, and it would be just enough to pay your fee. And then as soon as you paid your fee, they would raise the rates of your fee, so making it impossible to ever get out of there. But like 10,000 people a year would be in debtors' prison. and they would have a lot of starvation and torture and all that. It was just a horrible place because Victorian England was all about keeping poor people down. And like you said, that really colored Dickens, his social reform ideas.
His view
Just
of the
thought,
world.
oh man, you can imagine your dad's just gone. And he owed money to a baker, which eventually set
John Dickens
his dad. Yeah. And it was like 42 pounds, which I think today would be like $3,000 in our money today.
Must have eaten a lot of donuts.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I think he liked to the fancier life than he could afford, but a $3,000 debt shouldn't, cause you to have to live away from your family and spend all your time. And like, you couldn't get out of this debtor's prison.
Well, what I read was that in some cases the family would come to live with you in debtor's prison. So
sure, if they wanted to see you, they'd have to.
The wife and kids, younger kids. Well, this is sort of what happened with Dickens. John Dickens was put into debtor's prison, and his father and mother decided he should go to work, and he went to a boot blacking factory, and he not only had to go to work, but he moved away from them because the work was other side of town. He had to live with another woman. He boarded with somebody. And this is when he's 12 years old. And apparently he was pretty good at this job. He would put the labels on the boot blacks, on the boot blacking stuff. I don't even know what that is. Some sort of polish or powder or something.
Sounds dirty though, doesn't it?
It does sound dirty, yes. And that was kind of his job. And he always felt a little bit bitter toward his parents because they sent him there pretty quickly. Like they didn't try to figure something else out. They were like, nope, you go to work for the boot blacking. And that was something that he carried as a weight for a long time. But, eventually his father did get out. I think his Charles's grandmother, she died and left him some money, and he was able to get out. And they went to living together again. And at that point, Charles had several other careers. He ended up being very interested in the theater. He had seen Joseph Grimaldi. Do you know who this guy is?
Mm-mm.
He's the king of clowning.
Okay.
The father of modern clowning. He saw this guy perform. He was into mimes. He was into clowns. He was into comedy. He was into singing songs and making these sort of observations about people, almost what you would do with stand-up comedy these days. This is all stuff Charles was into. And because he was influenced by the theater, and because his father was willing to go into debt, he would take them to the theater. Like the kids actually got to go see plays and things that were normally reserved for upper crust families, but his father would borrow the money. They would go see a play, and he just really kind of fell in love with the idea of theater, with the idea of writing, and he actually got a job at the House of Commons reporting on the government and worked there for a while. And the thing about it is he saw his father...
15 though when he was doing this, right?
Yes. This is 15, 16 years old. His father had gone to debtor's prison, so he saw that happen. And then he's reporting on the House of Commons, and he's seen how much corruption and greed and stuff there is in government. And so I think those two things together sort of melded his opinion of what government was and, how they tried to keep most people down.
That's amazing though, that, and I guess we've talked about this on different episodes, that when we talked about like teenagers weren't really a thing back then. I mean, 12 years old, you're doing hard labor, and by 15, you're like a court reporter.
Right.
I mean, this is crazy. I think of, I don't know a lot of 15-year-olds that could take that job and then become aware, politically aware. But it was just a different time back then, man.
You grew up fast. Well, in 1834, he got an opportunity to publish something under a pseudonym, which I don't think he was actually paid for at the time. It was Sketches by Bose. Have you heard of that?
Yeah. And I've heard it called Bose, and I've heard them called Boz. I think with an English accent, it's kind of the same.
Do you know the origin of the name?
That it was supposed to be like Moses, but
Right.
when you had a cold, it sounded like Boses, and then it turned into Bose. But I think when you say it with an English accent, it sounds like Bose.
Bose. So it's kind of right in the middle.
Have you ever seen that movie, The Man Who Invented Christmas?
No.
There's a movie called The Man Who Invented Christmas that's about Dickens and like his process of writing Christmas Carol. And there they call him Boz, but it's said with an English accent. So
Boz. Bose.
Kind of, yeah.
Well, I was thinking it was Bose because of Moses, right?
Right. That's what I thought too. Yeah.
You would think, but you know where the Moses came from, or do you?
No.
His brother was named Augustus, and Augustus Caesar was, a big, famous sort of person from way back, even when Charles Dickens was around. So he called him Moses, even though his name was Augustus, because he was kind of lumping him in with other famous people from back in the day, like way back in the day. I will say that I noticed Dickens was very big on giving people nicknames.
Oh, yeah.
He also went by the inimitable.
Inimitable?
Inimitable. Inimitable, INIMITABLE. Inimitable? Inimitable?
This has got to be a YouTube short, though, this part.
So it means someone is so good and unusual that it's impossible to be copied.
Oh, he was. No, it was inimitatable. It couldn't be imitated. Inimitable.
Inimitable. Yes. Inimitable. He couldn't be imitated. Yes. Okay. That's where that comes from. I didn't even realize that. But he called himself the inimitable.
You know what else you could call him? Original.
The OG. He was very, very into trying to make the most content he could. He was a content creator, an early content creator. And he signed up for several of these things, several of these contracts he had, like Oliver Twist originally was signed under contract before he became famous. And what happened is, he'd say, all right, I'll write this book for you for 200 pounds, let's say, which was a lot of money back then. This is 200 pounds was several thousand, maybe $10,000 or whatever. But then he became really popular with these Pickwick Papers, and people, became kind of an overnight success, a literary celebrity, famous, all over the world. People are reading this stuff. And he actually went back on several of his contracts and basically said, I'm not doing it. You guys are getting way too good of a deal. I know I signed an agreement with you, but I'm not doing it. And so he backed out of more than one contract with a variety of publishers.
The very first instance of the word celebrity was in the Oxford Dictionary in 1851. And he was listed as like an example, like he was like the original celebrity.
Yeah. His fame grew before his fortune grew. And so he did still have trouble with money sometimes. And he tended to move into bigger and bigger houses. He got married and he had a bunch of kids, and he was very much a kind of figure out a plan and try to work that plan. I think he wanted a stable home life, right? He didn't want to have the situation that he had growing up. And so he married, but it's said that his marriage was not the best marriage. He was a little bit disappointed in the companionship that his wife brought him, Catherine Dickens.
He was an international celebrity too, and at least in the English-speaking world. In New York, people would come down to the docks when they knew those Pickwick Papers would be shipped in, and they would get them right off the dock, right off the press to read those monthly Pickwick Papers.
Yeah.
In New York. Yeah.
Well, so it's funny you mentioned that in New York, because that was where some of his worst copywriting infringements were happening, or a lot of publishers in the United States could take his work, copy it, publish it under a different name or something like that, and there wasn't a whole lot he could do about it at the time because copyright was not really
Sure.
It wasn't an international thing by any means, right? So that was a big problem that he had, and he actually came to the U.S. I think in 1842 and did some live readings and kind of did some negotiation on his own behalf to try and get some of that copyrighted money back.
Well, that was a good move too, because he made his name, he came up with a brand basically, right? So if you're going to buy a book and it isn't by him, you know that it's not going to be as good.
Right. You wanted the name on it. Them taking his material and changing the name was a little counterproductive because it would probably sell a lot more with the name Charles Dickens on it.
Yeah, and he would go on tour and just read his books.
Yeah.
And they said that people would even like pass out. They would be so excited, like
they were
Beatlemania.
they were so taken with his words and the way he read them.
Probably had poor ventilation in those halls, though, in those arenas, theaters, halls. I mean, and everyone was dressed, up. I'm not sure the passing out
hadn't showered
everything
in
to
a
do
month.
with him. Yeah, I mean, you gather that many people in a tight spot like that with no air conditioning, you're going to get some people passing out.
A lot of powder, but not a lot of showers going on.
No, a lot of stank.
A lot of stank. Well, so we mentioned he had in his kind of career, he was an editorial journal editor. He wrote 15 novels. He wrote 5 novellas. He wrote a bunch of short stories, nonfiction articles. He lectured, as you said. He also wrote these things called sketches. Have you heard of that?
No.
So I think that maybe is where the term sketch comedy comes from. It's kind of this little look into a life. So he would do sketches about married people. He would do sketches about poor people. He would do sketches about government officials, since he worked in that area.
Were they to be performed, or they were just like short stories?
They were short stories, but they didn't even really have a plot necessarily. They would be a description, and they would have maybe a few things would go on in them, but they were more or less just imagine a visual sketch, like somebody looking at it. It's like you're taking a look into this world for just a moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, that was one
and
of
his writing was so good that he could do that. Not everyone could pull that off.
That was actually one of the first things he started doing when he was really young, was writing sketches about people that he met and people in his family and people, that came into his household. And this is a 12-year-old kid, a 15-year-old kid writing sketches about people in their 30s and 40s and 50s that are coming to his house, and about the way they walked, the way they talked, the way they looked, the way they smelled, all that stuff.
It's funny because there's so many people in our world that do that now.
Yeah.
Right? Like LA is full of people that do that. But he was the first to do that.
Almost like a street photographer.
Yeah, he was like, that isn't what writing looked like at that time.
Yeah, no, he was breaking a lot of barriers.
Yeah.
He was definitely kind of going into new territory.
I mean, this was 200 years ago almost.
Yeah.
And he's doing things that we would recognize today.
Well, it's pretty hard to have that longevity as an artist. As we can tell from our Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, What is Rock and Roll, or Is Rock and Roll Dead episode, a lot of people burn bright and then burn out, but Charles Dickens did not.
But he only lived 58 years. I mean,
Yep.
In that respect, he didn't have a ton of, he wasn't super prolific.
You don't think so?
I think you could read everything that he ever wrote of any consequence in 2025.
Yeah. You're saying, I guess it depends on what you define as any consequence, because I know he wrote a lot of stuff under pseudonyms. He did write some things. I mentioned earlier that he would go back on some of these deals that he had with publishers. He sometimes had to write under a pseudonym because he had gone back on a deal with a publisher, and therefore he was kind of under a he wasn't supposed to write for anybody else during this period of time, and so he had to do it under a fake name so that he didn't get in legal trouble. But out of all that content, do you know which piece of work was his favorite?
His favorite?
Yeah.
Was it something random that we don't really
know?
No,
it's a pretty popular one.
Oh, I would say maybe Tale of Two Cities.
No, I have a quote, and I'll read it to you here. This is from Dickens himself. Of all my books, I like this the best. It will be easily believed that I am a fond parent to say every child of my fancy, and that no one can ever love that family as dearly as I love them. But like many fond parents, I have in my heart of hearts a favorite child, and his name is David Copperfield.
Oh, okay.
That was his favorite. He said it was the most that character was the most like him.
Okay.
In his opinion, David Copperfield.
I wonder what he would think of the magician David Copperfield.
Yeah, I had no idea that David Copperfield was taken from a Dickens book until, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years ago. But growing up, I remember the magician name, and that's who I knew. And then I was like, oh, this is a famous book by Dickens, and it's Dickens' favorite book. So I should probably read it. But he said it was the closest to him in terms of, what he grew up with and what he loved. So you mentioned too earlier that he did have some things that he did to try and help society, like setting up charities and stuff. He had one called Urania, Urania Cottage, and it was a place for fallen women. Have you heard of that thing?
No.
It was mostly for prostitutes. And also back in those days, if a woman had an affair or they did something to dishonor their family, like basically cheating on a husband or something like that, they would end up being disavowed. They would end up poor and destitute, and they wouldn't be able to get any help. They could go to prison. And so this Urania Cottage was set up for them to come to and learn and become productive. And then what they often did with these women after they graduated or finished the time there was they sent them to the U.S. or Australia so they could start a fresh life.
Wow. Yeah, when I was reading about all those crazy laws that happened in the 1830s that really put poor people down, one of the reforms that they did was to end child support. So if a guy got a woman pregnant, they said that if he gave her money, that would just incentivize women to keep doing that, to get pregnant. And they didn't want, quote unquote, illegitimate children running around. So it would promote bastardization and all these horrible words that they used to use back then. So they actually took away child support laws, which really put women in a horrible spot back then. And a lot of them had to turn to prostitution. They weren't allowed to work doing much of anything, right?
Right.
You learned with Typhoid Mary, there was only so many jobs that you could do. She was kind of a contemporary of these folks, right?
She was a little later, I thought.
A little later, yeah. But just as dirty and filthy as all the people we're talking about.
She could have been a character in a Dickens novel.
Yeah, but it was awful. I mean, when you think about how much they put poor people down, if you were a woman, it was even worse. And if you were a single woman, it was even worse.
Yeah. Yeah, they were ostracized. And I think I read an account of Dickens actually defending a woman. He was on a jury, and this servant girl who had a baby, the baby had died, was accused of murdering the baby. And he defended her and ended up getting her to not be guilty, a not guilty verdict, because he argued the case so well. And she hadn't killed the baby. She never stopped working, and the baby was born while she was on the staircase of the house she worked in, because she was walking down those stairs to do something for the Lord or whatever. So, yeah.
He was a good dude.
Well, he was, but then there was this little thing that after 22 years of being married to Catherine, In 1858, he actually declared her mentally unfit and left her.
Oh.
And they say that she wasn't mentally unfit. This was something he just used his star power to call her that, and that, she was never his soulmate. She was somebody that he married and thought he was in love with initially, but even early in their marriage, he had other friends, like more male companions that he was friends with. He wasn't very friendly with his wife. He had lots of children with her, so obviously he was cordial with her, but she was very subservient. She wasn't very quick-witted. She wasn't somebody that was maybe intellectually stimulating for him. And so again, 22 years of marriage, he left her, and there were rumors that he was running around with an actress, or even Catherine Dickens, Catherine, I forget what her maiden name was, but his wife's sister. There was some stuff going on there.
Again, he was ahead of his time. That stuff is very familiar. TMZ would have been all over Dickens' house.
Yes. Very, very Dickensian.
Right. Yeah. So maybe edit out the part where I said he was a good dude.
Well, I want to throw out a couple of other things that I've heard. Have you ever heard "Run Like the Dickens"?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you scared the Dickens out of me?
Yeah. Yeah.
What in the Dickens are you doing?
Substitute for a cuss word.
Well, it's a substitute for devil.
Oh.
It's actually "Run Like the Devil." You scared the devil out of me, and it's a euphemism, but it has nothing to do with Charles Dickens. It was actually traced back to Shakespeare and the Merry Wives of Windsor. He says something about "Run Like the Dickens."
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So a lot of people think when they say, you scared the Dickens out of me, we're talking about Charles Dickens, but
I always thought that. The only Dickens I know.
The only Dickens I know. Well, in 1870, died of a stroke. And it was a pretty big deal, I guess, when he died. A lot of people were pretty let down and disappointed that they wouldn't have him to write for them anymore.
It's sad.
It is sad. I mean, you don't really think about people back then having that. But he said himself that he would grow very attached to the characters when he was writing a book. And have you ever read a book and you're done with it, and then you're kind of sad that you're done with it? You're
Absolutely.
Like, I'm going to miss
TV shows. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Like a long series, you might watch, like Kate or Sawyer or Jack from Lost, right? If you watch that, if you invested, years and years of your life watching,
and then they're just gone.
Yeah, they're just gone. Kind of sad. Well, he was buried in Poets' Corner.
Yes.
And I think you can still see his grave in Westminster Abbey.
Right. Hey, did you go to Poets' Corner?
I don't think we did. When we were there 2 years ago, and I don't think we went there. But I'd go there now.
He was so they have actual burials there, and then they have monuments. So not everyone's buried there, but even if you're not buried there, they can put a monument to you. But like Chaucer is buried there.
Wow.
Rudyard Kipling is buried there. But even like more recent people like Laurence Olivier is buried there.
Okay.
But then they have monuments to people like Shakespeare or the Bronte sisters. But I heard that he had a secret funeral. Do you know anything about the secret funeral?
No, I hadn't heard about that. What happened?
I was going to ask you.
Oh. Well, I had read that he had asked for a small private funeral, but it ended up being a big deal because everybody was so sad. It's kind of like John Lennon when everybody came out in New York City and just like had that vigil, right? Just
maybe that's what it was. It was a secret one just because they didn't want to deal with the crowds or something.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that I love, one of the things that I really love, even if you don't read the books, is the character names that he comes up with.
Like
that
Pip.
Oh man, and just like Roald Dahl, who had to have been just a big
Dickens
fan, but even like Dr. Seuss, you see these kind of the character names were just wonderful. I'm going to read you some character names here that just, even if you've never read the book, you just an image comes up of these people, right? So Ebenezer Scrooge, man, what a great name. The rumor is that he was in Edinburgh and he found a tombstone, and the grave was for Ebenezer Lennox Scroggie. And then it said that his job, like it said Ebenezer Lennox Scroggie, and then under that it said a mealman. And a mealman is like somebody who sold cornmeal.
Okay.
But the rumor is that Dickens misread it as a mean man, and that it had always kind of stored away. Like he would hear funny names and they would store them away for later.
Right.
He'd think, I'm going to use that someday. And then when he was younger, he lived near a business, and the sign said Googe and Marnie. Googe, Goodge, and Marnie.
So that's where he got Scrooge and Marley.
Right. So these kind of things would just kind of stick with him. But Ebenezer Scrooge is one of the great names, and probably killed any idea of anybody being named Ebenezer these days. I mean, you don't see that name a lot.
I mean, there aren't a lot of Adolphs. There aren't a lot of Ebenezers.
But Bob Cratchit, I love that name too. Bob
Cratchit just sounds so pathetic and sad.
Yeah. And you mentioned Nicholas Nickleby. Just what a cool name that is.
Yeah.
Oliver Twist, the Artful Dodger that came from that too, right?
Yeah.
David Copperfield.
Fagin.
But here's one that's also, can you name a Dickens character was also a name of a classic rock band?
No.
Uriah Heep.
Really?
Uriah Heep. Yeah, was a character.
I never knew. What book? Do you know?
Uriah Heep, I think, came from
Uriah Heep from David Copperfield.
Do you know what song they sing?
I don't know anything about them.
But you've heard of them.
Yeah, I've heard of them. They're one of those bands that I was like, whatever. But yeah.
Yeah. They sing that song where they go, fighting, killing, wine and women, gonna put me to my grave. Running, hiding, losing, crying, nothing left to save.
Okay.
But my life. Remember that part? Remember that part where they go, but my life. You remember that?
I don't. No. What is it? Do you know what that song's called?
Stealing. I was stealing when I should have been buying.
Okay. You know I'll have to check it out.
Well, that's you'll know it. It's classic
kind of
rock staple.
It's kind of like Veruca Salt, right?
Sure. Well, and there's again those are great names from Roald Dahl. Like Augustus Gloop and those kind of. Wackford Squeers was another name of a character. Isn't that a cool name?
What is Wackford Squeers in?
I don't know.
Okay.
Martin Chuzzlewit.
Wow. Okay, that sounds like a Simpsons character.
And then in Christmas Carol, his old boss was Mr. Fezziwig. You remember that?
Yeah, Mr. Fezziwig.
The one that does the dancing.
Yeah.
Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig. And those are just such whimsical names. Like I said, Dr. Seuss kind of got us used to those kind of names, but just really cool names. And when you sit down and read a book and you see characters like that, you're all in. Now, how are you going to not?
He was big on giving nicknames to people, like I said, about his own nicknames. Did you also know that he was an animal lover?
Did not.
He had cats, dogs, horses, but he also had a raven, and he had a raven named Grip. And his raven was an inspiration for the character Grip in Barnaby Rudge.
In that movie about him, somebody gave a raven as a present, and they said the raven could talk, and then the raven started talking like a parrot. I didn't know ravens could do that.
Is that actually true that they can?
Who knows?
Huh. Well, he was I just Googled it, and it says ravens can talk. They can mimic speech, and they're very intelligent.
Yeah, and they did. So that was in that movie. Did you know that you mentioned the readings that he would go on and like the America tour, that the first ticket scalpers ever appeared at his readings. Like that's where
Wow.
ticket scalping was basically invented, right?
There was
This is before,
so many people that wanted to get in and only so many tickets. And so
yeah, this is before we really had like sports, and I don't think there was a lot of touring bands or anything like that. But he was
No.
one of the tours that everybody looked forward to, and people would go outside and sell their tickets for above face value. Shout out Sandeep Sony, one
Shout
of
out
the
to
original
Sandeep Sony.
ticket scalpers.
Yeah, probably back in the day, he was scalping tickets to Dickens. It was Dickens with Henry Rollins opening at a spoken word thing.
Now the the term bah humbug. Let's talk about that for a second, because when I did the episode on who was it that said was always talking about hoaxes, humbugs.
Oh, yeah. He's the guy who did the Greatest Show on Earth.
Yeah,
right?
Barnum.
Barnum. Yeah.
Everything. Remember, that's where he talked about humbugs, right?
Yes.
And everyone thinks that bah humbug comes out of A Christmas Carol, but actually can't really find those two words together. Like he's always he's just so like grumpy. Scrooge, this is. He's always going around going bah, bah. And then he would say humbug a lot, but he would never actually say bah humbug.
Oh, those two were put together later, like by the audience. Fan fiction?
I've never even seen it like in a play. I've never seen him say bah humbug. He just always says Christmas is a humbug. And he said humbug like bullocks, basically. Like,
well, you know what it means.
Bullocks.
It means a fraud.
Yeah, hoax. Right. That's what I said with Barnum, that humbug was a hoax. But he always said that Christmas was a hoax. But I don't think we've talked about this yet, that prior to A Christmas Carol, Christmas was not a huge holiday. Not the way we know it now. We would not recognize Christmas before Christmas Carol came out.
So maybe that's why Bob Cratchit had to work, because it was like a bank holiday, but it wasn't really everybody else.
It was the
holiday.
kind of thing that people would take off and people would roll their eyes, like
President's
just
Day.
trying to get a day off of work. Like technically you could get it off, but what is there really to do? There were no people that had like traditions on Christmas or anything like that. Easter was a much bigger religious holiday. And they didn't have a lot of holidays on the calendar back in Victorian England. People just worked every day, 7 days a week. You didn't get weekends off, and your kids worked. This is just pretty miserable time. But the Christmas tree and the goose and all those traditions that we see in Christmas Carol that we kind of follow today, that's where it all started. It was not that much of the idea that people would go from house to house singing Christmas carols was just a new thing back then. So that's why that movie is called The Man Who Invented Christmas, because essentially if you went to pre Dickens England, you wouldn't have recognized December 25th. Definitely there was no Christmas season.
And he had a couple of other plays about Christmas too, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, there were some precursors to A Christmas Carol where they were even similar, like being visited by goblins.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned humbug earlier. Two other instances of humbug that I found interesting. One was from The Wizard of Oz. The Scarecrow refers to the Wizard of Oz as a humbug.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And as 100 years later.
And the wizard actually agrees. Well, this was in the 1900 book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. This was 60, 70 years old later. And then apparently there was a doctor who was doing a surgery, and it was one of these surgeries with an audience, other doctors watching to see what was going on. He was using some sort of ether as an anesthetic during the surgery, and he put the patient under, and he said, "Gentlemen, this is no humbug."
Yeah, I like that. I think if I was a writer and I was writing under a pseudonym, I would go by Bob Humbug.
Bob, how about Alec Humbug?
Well, it doesn't roll off the tongue like Bob Humbug.
or yummy humbug, tummy humbug. Lots of so many things you can do with humbug. Well, I got to say, this was interesting because I had a very one-track mind about Charles Dickens before, and that was pretty much Christmas Carol, and I suppose Oliver Twist to some degree. But knowing that he was somebody who did fight for and generally cared about the little man because that's who he was growing up was a pretty refreshing thing to learn.
And Christmas Carol has never been out of print.
Yeah. It's like one of the only books to go that long. Maybe it's the longest ever.
200 years, other than like the Bible.
Right.
I mean, maybe think of how popular Harry Potter would have to be, though. It's only been out, 30 years?
Yeah.
To survive another 150 to 200 years to never be. I don't think Harry Potter's going to make it.
I think our future podcasters will be doing a podcast talking about our podcast and how we talked about Harry Potter on our podcast. That's what I predict. If somebody's listening to this in the year 2162, write us an email at not@dirtnapcity. Although at that point, it probably we will be at Dirtnap City, so it will be r@dirtnapcity.
Right. Wow, that's deep.
That's deep. Well, Merry Christmas, Alex.
Merry Christmas. What do we have in store for season 4?
Season 4 is going to be a barn burner. I'm telling you. We've got some supporters behind us. We're coming up on that 100th episode. That'll hit in season 4. I feel like we should probably do a few more in-person recordings and a few more nights, like we did before our last in-person recording, where we did a little kind of exploratory, creative session. Don't you think?
What about a live episode?
I think we're saving that for season 5.
Okay. I don't mean live where they listen to it live in front of an audience.
Yeah, season 5. Season 5. I think season 4 is going to be where we go all Dickinsonian. We get big. We have to renege on our previous contracts because they weren't big enough for us. We're going to get big for our britches and have 10 kids and move into a giant house and visit America.
So when does season 4 start?
That'll be early in 2025.
Right. So is there any weeks off here?
Oh, yeah. We're taking a couple of weeks off to spend a little time with the family, go see some plays, do a little writing, maybe even record some episodes so we can catch up because, at this point right now, as of this recording, we have one episode in the can. We're cutting it close with this, my friend.
I mean, if you're getting this episode weekly, will you have any breaks between season 3 or season 4?
Yeah, you're going to have about a month.
Okay.
About a month off. So go back and listen to our past catalog. Here's the to-dos for our audience. If you're still listening at 54 minutes into this thing, thank you, first of all. And second of all, go back and listen to our past episodes. There's a lot of gems in there. A lot of great stuff that you could cover. And
what's the one that you think is the least appreciated, the least listened to, that you think deserves a second
Mr.
chance?
Rogers.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Rogers, for sure.
I think a lot of people think they already know about Mr. Rogers because maybe they've seen the doc or maybe they've seen the Tom Hanks movie. But Kelly covers ground that those movies don't touch.
Yeah,
on.
so much, so deep.
Personal experience, even with Mr. Rogers, like a personal encounter. You don't get that from Tom Hanks.
No, you really don't. Even though Tom Hanks was Abraham Lincoln's cousin. Did you know that?
We don't get into that stuff on this. We don't talk about live people in this podcast.
That's right. You have to be dead and you have to be interesting.
You have to be dead to me. I don't even know who Tom Hanks is. Until you're dead, I don't even know who you are.
All right. Well, thanks, Mr. Dickens. We enjoy your work, and hopefully you're up there writing in Dirtnap City and telling people, or down there, wherever Dirtnap City is, and keeping people well entertained and looking out for the poor.
Please, sir, can I have some more? Dreams are dashed on a cold stone floor. Charles Dickens knew the score, writing tales that the rich ignore. He and hope in a world so grim. Streets of London dark and dim, voices whispering on a whim. Victorian ghosts, they sing a hymn. Please sir, can you feed my soul? From the pages where the stories roll, a genius under gaslight glow, in the baritone of evenings low. He gave a name to every pain. In battered hearts despair remains. Through fog and grief in alley lanes, his words became a worldly chain. Poet of the poorest plight, guiding lost ones to the light. Echoes of his pen still write in the shadows of each night. Please sir, can you feed my soul?